Hello and welcome to SimCast, the higher education simulation podcast. My name's Tony Jeremy. I'm the academic lead for simulation-based education at UEA Norwich.
Hi everybody, welcome to SimCast. My name's Lawrence Hill and I'm the chair of the simulation group in the School of Health Sciences at UEA Norwich.
So Lawrence, what are we going to be talking about in this episode?
Right, today we are going to be talking about the role of using artificial intelligence in the development of simulation scenarios.
If you like this video, please give us a like. Equally so, if you don't like the video, give us a dislike, but let us know in the comments why, because we're always keen to improve. To keep up to date with all things sim related, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to check that notification bell. So Lawrence, AI. I think it's fair to say in higher education, it's getting a bit of a bad rap.
For sure. There's a lot of chatter, isn't there, about AI in higher education. There's a lot of concern, there's a lot of worry about what it means for the integrity of assessment processes in the main.
Yeah, because you can essentially log into a website and get a computer-generated piece of software to write an essay for you.
In about 10 seconds.
Yeah.
It's frighteningly easy, it's frighteningly powerful. But what we wanted to do in this episode, in a previous episode, we talked about the 4 horsemen of the debrief apocalypse. Yep. And that was quite an apocalyptic feel. And it sort of feels like the role of AI in higher education has a sort of apocalyptic feel about it as well.
You talk to academics and it is almost like the end of days, isn't it? And to the extent where we're having to change assessment processes because of the fears of what's going to happen with the integration of AI, how is it going to make the assessment process fair, that so on and so forth. But because it's such a powerful tool, why don't we harness that power into something positive instead, particularly when we're looking at simulation? Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's how a lot of people are thinking about tackling AI in conventional higher education assessments is, right, we need to accept the fact that people probably just are going to use it to some extent. So, we should think about doing the same thing because we can actually use it and it's really powerful and we can use it for the learner's benefit.
Yeah. So we've both used AI, haven't we? We've both created a Chat GPT account. Have you used it before?
No, not really. I just set up an account because I thought it would be interesting and I asked it a couple of silly questions. And then we were talking about this podcast today. And we just sort of said, like, have you done this before? No. Have you not done this before? No. Let's give it a go. And I think it's fair to say my jaw hit the floor.
Yeah. It's alarming how quickly that information is brought together.
Yeah. So what we did was we both set Chat GPT a very simple, what seemingly simple sentence, design us a simulation. And we got quite an impressive response and certainly something that we're going to base the rest of this episode around.
Yeah.
So what was yours about?
So I'm an operating department practitioner as a background, so as a clinical background. So I obviously thought, well, how could I use this to create a scenario for my ODP students? I thought I'll keep it relatively simple and just see what it comes out with initially. So the question that I wrote to ChatGPT was, write a healthcare simulation scenario on anesthesia airway complications for ODPs.
Okay. And what did it come up with?
Well, it comes up with a title. So it says anesthesia airway complications simulation for ODPs, and that's obviously fairly self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. It then gives me a session overview, and it tells me that the ODPs are going to encounter a problem in the simulation based on an airway complication during the administration of anesthesia. It then gives me a setting to work with. It then gives me some details, so some bits about the patient, and of course it's very generic. John Smith, 55 years old, has some basic comorbidities to go on, importantly including moderate sleep apnea and BMI, high BMI. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of see where the scenario is potentially going to go there. And then it gives me a generic scheduled procedure, which in this one is a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. And then what it does is it gives me a simulation sequence. So it gives me, how many is there? 9 points of how ChatGPT thinks the scenario or the whole simulation event actually should kind of unfold.
In terms of the kind of action phase of the simulation?
Yeah, so the first point is a pre-briefing phase, and the last point is a debriefing phase. So it's bookends the scenario itself with the briefing and the debriefing. Of course, we would recommend
strongly advocate that. Yeah, we stand with Chat GPT on this.
Absolutely. But the other points are basically how the scenario should unfold. It has things like it talks about a onset of a complication. So this would be your classic kind of trigger point. You're at a crossroads now. The scenario is going to go one way or the other, depending on how the individuals perform. But what Chat GPT hasn't really done is looked at that variation.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of, this is what should happen in a sort of best case scenario.
Yeah, okay. So from what you describe, it's quite linear. It doesn't have that. It's an artificial intelligence. It doesn't have that nuance built in, the kind of variability of the scenario. No,
it doesn't. I mean, again, it's based the scenario around an airway complication. So with the onset of the complication, it says approximately 5 minutes into the induction, the patient's oxygen saturation drops to 85%. And then later on, it says it drops further to 80%. And at that point, a decision is made whether to intubate the patient or not. It talks about the fact that in the kind of the setup, it's got standard monitoring equipment, and it talks about ECG, pulse oximetry, non-invasive blood pressure. Did it talk about capnography? Don't know if it did.
Don't remember you saying that.
No. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't give you those clinical variations alongside the desaturations. So again, as a facilitator, you could use this as a starter for 10, but you're going to have to use your clinical experience and knowledge to sort of put
context
and context into the scenario.
No, definitely. So could you see yourself using that as a template for writing a simulation that you'd actually use with learners?
Absolutely. It's a great starter for 10. And I don't know about you, but I have spent what feels like hours sitting again at a blank screen thinking, I need to write 4 scenarios for this session coming up. And my brain just goes blank.
Yeah.
So
like, it's always easier, isn't it, to edit something than it is to start fresh?
Yeah. It's great to give you ideas. And bearing in mind, my initial question was, write a healthcare simulation scenario on anesthesia airway complication. It's really sort of helped pad that out. And of course, you just changed a few of those keywords in that initial thing, and it'll help you down a different route.
Yeah.
Or add a little bit of extra context on it. And I guess that's where Chat GPT works really, really well, is you can say, okay, well, what about if the patient had anaphylaxis? How would that change things up? And I didn't go that far. I just went to the initial scenario. But it certainly gives you enough to get started.
And I suppose that's where, the skills of the facilitator, the clinical knowledge and experience of the person facilitating the simulation brings that essentially template, sterile kind of scenario to life with that kind of detail and that richness.
Yeah, and that's the difference, isn't it? It's kind of the same with if people were using it to be naughty and to write assignments and essays. What it needs, all of this AI stuff, is it needs the experience of the person behind it to go through it and go, well, is that realistic? Is that not? So if you are thinking about using Chat GPT to do something naughty,
we would advise not.
Advise not to, because it's great to get you on going along to sort of help signpost you, but it is not, if I just use this and ran it as a simulation scenario, it would have lots of holes and flaws in it.
Yeah, it would. It would be thin.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't
and you'd probably get learners testing it and going, well, what about this?
Yeah.
What is the heart rate? Well, I haven't prepared that because ChatGPT didn't tell me to.
Yeah, of course. So a good template, a good starter. And the limitations are in the detail and the nuance.
Yeah. And again, I literally did the first question and just had a look at, so I guess with further discussion with the AI, I might be able to pad out the detail. Could you give me some baseline observations? I don't know. So maybe that, but again, as an experienced clinician, you should probably be able to do that bit yourself. For me, it's that kind of, right, okay, my mind's gone blank, and it helping you with that.
Yeah.
Once I'm getting going, I'm sure it'll be fine to just add that detail on.
Interesting. And how about using what you've got there as a simulation facilitator? Could you take what is written there, or would you have to reformat and repurpose it?
Yeah, I think it's. I would personally like to format it in a way that I'm comfortable with. I'm working on developing templates to be used by simulation facilitators so that there is a familiarity with it. And very much like our debriefing model, which is grab and go, I want to have that same approach. Obviously, Chat GPT doesn't have that.
Yeah.
So being able to translate that into a format which is understandable for the facilitator, which you can pick up and you can use and you're familiar with, definitely needs some work with it as well. So the same thing with, it talks about the pre-brief phase and the debrief phase. It doesn't tell you how to do that or how to structure it. So there's definitely, it gets you going, but it certainly needs the experience of the simulation facilitator to make it come to life.
Yeah, to give it that dynamism. I can't see what Chat GPT has given you, but if it's anything like what Chat GPT gave me, it's reams of text.
Yeah.
And when I'm running a simulation, the last thing I want to be is, reading War and Peace while I'm trying to listen to what's happening. So it's about saying, well, yeah, maybe there's some good background, but actually what you want in terms of the detail of that patient deterioration is just numbers on the screen, or in an ideal world, have it pre-programmed.
Yeah, so mine has given me numbers and almost...
Has it?
Not numbered points, rather than actual clinical vital signs and stuff. It literally, again, it just talks about the desaturation. So it is just digestible, but probably not when I'm running a simulation.
No, sure. Like it would need some adaptation.
Yes. Yeah.
And you would need to give it that dynamism that a human facilitator can introduce. Not all human facilitators can introduce. But
we were a little bit twitchy, weren't we, when we did this, where we're thinking, are our jobs on the line? And I think reassuringly, perhaps, maybe not. We'll maybe come back to that.
We'll come back to that, because that is a question I asked Chat GPT. I'm sure that can't be the only person that's asked.
Can you put my P45 in the post?
Yeah, I wonder how many. If you've asked Chat GPT an existential question about whether or not Chat GPT will inevitably replace you, then please chuck us a comment or a like, just to let us know we're not alone. But so I did the same thing. So I plugged in a question as well into Chat GPT.
Yeah, what was yours about?
Yeah. Let me tell you. So I asked Chat GPT to design a simulation that explores an ethical dilemma for paramedics. So really broad. And as I sort of said earlier, I was stunned at it was literally within 10 seconds. I had a simulation overview which kind of set the context of a paramedics responding to a multiple patient kind of road traffic collision.
So you didn't write that? The AI came up with that?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things to say, is that it's made quite a stereotypical assumption about what an ethical dilemma is in paramedic practice, for one.
Okay.
So, and actually that's probably quite a stereotypical clinical deterioration for an ODP as well, right?
Yeah.
A desaturation in a patient who's just been anaesthetized. Yeah, I've got a major road accident with multiple severely injured casualties.
Yeah.
That doesn't really reflect the reality of ethical dilemmas in paramedic practice, in my experience. Maybe once in a blue moon. But it's a start. And then it talks about a simulation, a scenario description, a fictional urban environment that presents participants with a series of choices they must make, each of which presents ethical dilemmas. And they gave us a series of dilemmas, actually. So it said you've got patient triage, you've got to decide which casualties need to be treated first.
Okay.
That you'd need to grapple with the dilemma of whether to treat the most severely injured, potentially saving them, or prioritise those who are more well. It talks about scarce resources, personal relationships, i.e. knowing somebody that's involved in the accident. And again, kind of fanciful, but probably a useful ethical kind of discussion point. It talks about the decision to withhold treatment and a transportation dilemma.
That's interesting. So it's looking at almost those areas where you might have those ethical dilemmas on top of what would be the obvious one, which is patient focused. And giving you some ideas for that, which again, if you're struggling to think about the different types of ethical dilemmas that you might be encountering, it's a great starting point, isn't it?
It definitely is. And it's definitely highlighted some like big and bold areas that could definitely be discussed. I think, how useful would this be for, paramedic students talking about everyday ethics that they encounter in practice? Maybe not like amazingly useful. But in terms of a simulation that's due to set up or perhaps a wider piece of work and a wider discussion about the principles of medical ethics, or how you make some decisions in practice under pressure and with scarce resources in a more abstract way, which is really what a debrief is all about, then I think it has some real value. What I was particularly impressed with, I have to say, was the fact that it wrote actually quite good learning outcomes.
Yeah, mine did as well. So mine had the bullet points, and then at the end it had learning objectives. Yeah.
I mean, evaluate the implications of different ethical frameworks contrasting utilitarianism with deontology on decision making. This is a really high level learning outcome relating to ethical decision making in practice, and even above it talks about comparing like in the kind of description it talks about comparing consequentialism with deontology and virtue ethics frameworks as a way of navigating complexity. I'm writing a paper about this at the moment, and Chat GPT is kind of on point. So I was quite impressed with that. But one of the things that it did say was that it was, and I quite liked, it had a note and it said the simulation is designed for educational purposes and should be facilitated by experienced instructors or facilitators who are knowledgeable about emergency medical services and ethical considerations. So I asked it...
You couldn't help yourself, couldn't you? I literally just put in, write me a scenario. You're like, interesting. I'm going to poke it with a stick.
I did. I said, no, thank you. Sort of slightly passive aggressive. What about the skills of the facilitators? Do they need educational theory? Because that's something that we've talked about a lot in previous podcasts. We've talked about kind of creating psychological safety. We've talked about adult learners. We've talked about, experiential learning. And it came up trumps again.
What did it say?
It talked about adult learning principles. It talked about the need for effective communication between facilitators, advanced communication skills. It talked about questioning techniques, asking open questions as opposed to closed questions. It talked about understanding those ethical frameworks that you're going to be exploring in the simulation. So like it was kind of saying, you're going to be teaching this stuff, you kind of need to know about it, which I thought was quite good. Talked about the need for expertise and knowledge, and it talked about skills in debriefing, in cultural competence, cultural sensitivity, and adaptability and flexibility.
And it gave you some ideas for debriefing as well, some debriefing tools and techniques, didn't it?
It did. It did. It came up with Rudolph. It came up with Jenny Rudolph. It came up with debriefing with good judgment, and it also talked about Diamond Debrief, both of which are recognised debriefing tools that many people listening will be aware of. Yeah,
maybe one day I'll come up with the UEA debriefing model as well.
We need to publish it first, probably, but you never know. I was quite impressed with that, and that is when it triggered my existential crisis. And I was like, because we deliver a course training people on lots of these principles.
Yeah,
and we talk
that's
about
going to be a future episode. Is we've been running a simulation instructor course, of which many of those educational theories that and principles that are implemented into the course.
Yeah.
And we're going to be doing an evaluation of that.
We're going to do an evaluation of that and bring it to this SimCast. Because we'd love to share some of what we've been doing and also hear about what other simulation centres and in higher education or outside of higher education are doing
to develop their faculty.
Yeah, exactly. So that was fascinating.
Are you still in your existential crisis?
Oh, I'm forever. I lurch from existential crisis to existential crisis, but I enjoy it. It's part of why I get out of bed in the morning.
So, what for you in your scenario? What were the benefits, and what do you think some of the limitations are?
I think starting with the benefits, I think it outlined some really good principles that would be useful to discuss in a simulation debrief around ethical decision making in practice. It picked out three very important, historically and professionally important ethical frameworks for navigating complexity. That I was really impressed with. I was really impressed with the fact that it gave me effective level approach, actually quite advanced, I would say, learning outcomes. Those I would not expect those to be like level 4 first year student learning outcomes. So I was impressed with that. It didn't give me really any detail about how the scenario should evolve, or any real nuance in terms of, you know, what might be happening. But I have a feeling that if I asked it, it would.
Okay.
You know, like it's...
So the limitation is your questioning rather than the AI itself.
And how about that for like a little kind of metaphor for simulation debriefing as well? The limitation is the questions that we ask, not the learners themselves. But yeah, so in terms of its deficits, I think, as I sort of said earlier, it was quite stereotypical. It took quite a stereotypical view of what an ethical dilemma is in practice.
But if you think about it, all it's doing is trawling the internet to find the information to put in a digestible format that you can then interact with. So it's going back to those stereotypes, which are going to be those top hits that it's looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like anything, if you're searching for things, you need to dig a bit deeper. It is the key is in that search criteria, or in this instance, the questions that you're asking the AI.
Yeah, quite right. But it was what I really also enjoyed was when I did ask it that existential question of literally, can Chat GPT replace me as a simulation educator? I thought I'll just open my heart out to Chat GPT and just share a bit of mutual vulnerability, and it repaid me with vulnerability. So it talked about lots of the things that we've mentioned throughout that have been some of the limitations of these. It talks about the kind of the limitations of an artificial intelligence for designing simulation or facilitating simulation around adaptability and contextual understanding. And that was crucial, wasn't it, to bringing your scenario alive?
Yeah, it absolutely was. Yeah.
It talks about empathy and emotional intelligence. Like clearly ChatGPT is not going to be able to do that. And dynamic interaction. And it's that so often that makes simulation powerful.
Yeah. That's the difference, isn't it? Is the simulation, it's all about, and simulation-based education is all around people and experiences. And that's where the limitations of AI are.
Yeah. It's that, in simulation where something's happening and the learner has this kind of moment of, I'm really not sure what to do.
And a good simulation facilitator picks up on that.
Yeah. And they just go like, okay, well, what do you think?
And can go off piste if need to.
Yeah. And, and gives those non-verbal communication, those cues and those kind of tacit kind of nudges and steers and encouragement and discouragement from, I'm not sure that's, whatever it is that you're trying to kind of curate this path through the simulation.
I'm just wondering where ChatGPT, which of the 4 horsemen of the debrief apocalypse ChatGPT would fill. I've got a feeling maybe the critic.
Oh yeah, maybe. I think probably not the groupie. But yeah, perhaps the tutor.
When it turns into the hero, I think we really need to worry.
Then we do need to worry. Yeah, that was one of the things here that almost made my blood run cold. And it's this line here. There are several important. We need the robot voice. There are several
Hang on,
important.
do you want me to pop it off?
Yeah, there are several important reasons why they might not completely replace human simulation educators.
I mean, the sentence itself is scary. The robot voice as well. Not good. I'm not pressing that button.
I'm just
again.
not cool with the might not completely replace human simulation educators in certain contexts.
It's got Skynet vibes about it, hasn't it?
Just can't do that, Dave. Nuance interpretation, adaptability, flexibility, creativity, personalized feedback are all things, or personalized debrief are those things that we bring as humans to simulation.
Interesting.
It's hard to argue with ChatGPT on this. It has pretty much nailed it in terms of its own limitations.
Yeah.
Which, is at least humble.
So maybe we should give the last word of this podcast to Chat GPT then.
I think so. And I think, yeah, we can end with that because it's kind of probably, hopefully we'd have come up with something as eloquent as this. But what Chat GPT had to say ultimately was, while AI can serve as a valuable tool to enhance certain aspects of simulation-based education, the role of a simulation educator encompasses a range of skills, including adaptability, emotional intelligence, context awareness, and interpersonal communication that are not easily replicable by AI. Therefore, AI can be a helpful complement to human educators, but is unlikely to fully replace their role, especially in scenarios where complex ethical dilemmas and dynamic interactions are involved, which is basically every simulation worth its salt.
Yeah. And people struggle with some of those, let alone the AI as well. So again, I guess the key message is develop your facilitators. Continue to educate them, continue to learn yourself as a simulation educator in all of those areas which it's highlighted, because I'd agree with most of those as well.
Yeah. But also you can lean on the technology to give you a bit of a leg up, because we're conscious that we're all wearing multiple hats and that actually just getting something down on the page sometimes is half the battle won.
As usual, it's something that complements you. You know, it's the same thing when you're in a seminar. The PowerPoint presentation should be a compliment on you and your performance, not leading it. And same thing to be said here.
Couldn't agree more. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode and we hope it's given you some ideas. If it has given you some ideas, we'd love to hear about these. Drop us a comment, drop us a like. Please do subscribe to our podcast to keep up to date with all things healthcare simulation.
Thanks, everyone. See you in the next one.
Bye.